Ready for a deep dive into a case that really highlights the complexities of family court.
Absolutely. This one is fascinating.
We're looking at Elena Ward's story. She filed this complaint, and it is dense. But the heart of it is she wants to reunite with her 5 kids, hasn't seen them in over 263 days.
263 days. And she hasn't been able to see them because she's in the middle of this custody battle. It's messy.
And at the center of it all is this guardian ad litem, Victor Langston.
Right. And the guardian ad litem, or GAL for short, that's a court-appointed role. Their job is to represent, really to be the voice of the best interests of the children.
So you'd want that person to be like super neutral, right? Like totally objective, just looking out for what's best for the kids.
Exactly. They're supposed to be impartial investigators, talk to everyone involved, the parents, the kids, teachers, therapists, really get a full picture.
Okay, so they have a pretty crucial role, which makes what Elena's alleging even more concerning.
Right. Elena's saying that Langston has not been objective, that he's shown bias against her, and potentially put the kids at risk.
Wow. So she wants him removed, and she's asking for a full investigation.
Exactly. She doesn't trust him to make recommendations in the best interest of her children.
Which, if you're in a custody battle, that's like the last thing you want to be dealing with, on top of everything else.
Absolutely.
So let's get into the specifics. What's Elena saying Langston's done that makes her believe he's biased and not looking out for her kids?
Well, she describes several incidents in her complaint. Like, she talks about his behavior in court.
Okay, how so?
Well, she says Langston completely ignored her, like completely blanked her, but then was super friendly with her ex-husband and his lawyers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like warm greetings, chatting with them, and she's just sitting there feeling invisible.
I bet. Talk about adding insult to injury. I mean, you're already in this emotionally charged situation.
Right, and whether it was intentional or not, that kind of behavior, it can really make someone feel like they're not being heard.
Totally. And like you were saying earlier, if the GAL is supposed to be neutral, that doesn't seem very impartial, does it?
Exactly. It plants seeds of doubt. And it makes you wonder what's happening outside the courtroom.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so that's his demeanor. What else? What other concerns does she raise?
Well, she alleges that Langston dismissed her concerns about her children's health, which, like we were saying, that's kind of his whole job, right? To be aware of their well-being.
Yeah, that seems pretty central to the role.
Right. So, for example, she found out from friends, not from Langston, that 2 of her children have developed vitiligo.
Vitiligo. Isn't that a skin condition?
Yes, exactly. And we've talked about this before, but it can be triggered by stress.
Oh, right. And I'm just thinking, these kids are going through a custody battle, separation from their mother. That's incredibly stressful.
Absolutely. And that's why it seems like something Langston should have been on top of, or at least he should have told her, right? Kept her in the loop about her children's well-being.
I would think so. It's her kids.
Right. But she found out from friends, which is pretty disheartening, I'd imagine. And when she brought it up to Langston, he basically shut her down.
He did. Wow. So he's not really communicating with her about the children.
It seems that way. And it gets even more complicated with her attempts to involve her therapist.
Her therapist. Okay, what happened there?
Elena says Langston refused to communicate with her long-term therapist, wouldn't speak to her, even blocked her from accessing Elena's psychological evaluations.
Hold on. So he's saying he wants what's best for the kids, but then he's preventing a mental health professional who knows Elena well from providing insight into her mental state and ability to parent.
That's what Elena's arguing. And it does make you question how thorough his investigation really is, if he's cherry-picking the information he's willing to consider.
That's a good point. Like, is he really getting the full picture?
Right. It's concerning. And it's not just about what he's not doing. There are also claims of him actually misrepresenting facts in court.
Wait, what? Misrepresenting facts to the court?
Yes, and that's pretty serious.
Ah.
For example, Elena says he denied requesting a second psychological evaluation for her when she believes there's documentation proving he did just that.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a whole other level. That's not just a communication breakdown. It feels like something else is going on here.
Right. It really makes you question his motives and his actions. And unfortunately, it gets even more serious when you bring in the allegations made by Elena's daughter.
Her daughter. Oh, you're talking about Reagan.
Yes. Reagan made some serious allegations against her father, who is, of course, Elena's ex-husband.
Right, and we're talking about sexual abuse allegations here, which, if true, are incredibly serious.
Right. And this is Elena's point. She's saying Langston didn't investigate these claims.
He didn't.
That's what Elena alleges. She says he's basically ignoring this very serious issue.
We're talking about a child's safety here. It's not just about whether Elena gets custody, it's about whether the kids are safe.
Exactly. And that's why these allegations are so disturbing.
It's hard to wrap my head around it, honestly. You have a child making accusations like this, and the person who's supposed to be looking out for her doesn't do anything. That's really hard to believe.
It really is. And what's even more concerning, Elena isn't the only one who has raised issues with Langston's conduct as a GAL. It seems like other mothers have had similar experiences.
Wait, really? There are other families who have had problems with this same GAL?
That's what Elena is claiming. And if that's true, it points to a much bigger problem.
Right. It goes beyond just one custody case. It could be something systemic within the family court system itself. So we're not just talking about one isolated case here, potentially. If other mothers are saying, hey, we've seen similar things, that's a red flag.
It's huge. And it makes you wonder, how many other cases has Langston been involved in? How many other families might this be impacting?
It raises so many questions about the system itself, right? Like, how are guardians ad litem chosen in the first place? What kind of training do they receive?
Exactly. Is there any oversight to ensure they're truly being impartial? Or is it possible that someone could operate like this with a clear bias for years without anyone noticing?
And that's a scary thought, especially in family court where the stakes are already so high. We're talking about kids' lives, their well-being. It's not just a legal matter, it's deeply personal.
It absolutely is. And to think that someone in a position of power, someone entrusted with making recommendations about a child's best interests, might be abusing that power, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Elena's really putting herself out there by including these other mothers' experiences in her complaint. It takes guts to speak out against something like this, especially when you're already going through a custody battle.
She is. And it makes you wonder, if she hadn't spoken up, would anything have changed? It's easy to feel powerless in these situations up against the legal system.
Absolutely. So what is she asking the court to do about this? If she wants to see change, what would that look like?
Well, she's calling for a full investigation into Langston's conduct. And not just in her case, but across all the cases he's been involved in. She wants to see if there's a pattern of bias, a pattern of misconduct.
Wow, that's a big ask. I mean, that could be years' worth of cases to review.
It would be a huge undertaking for sure. But if it means protecting other families from going through what she's going through, it could be worth it.
Right, because how do you even begin to quantify the impact of something like this on a family? The stress, the emotional toll, the financial burden?
Exactly. And that actually brings up another point that Elena raises in her complaint, the financial aspect of all this.
Oh, right. It's easy to forget that these legal battles are expensive. Lawyers, court fees, evaluations, it adds up fast.
It really does. And in Elena's case, she alleges that there were some financial discrepancies, some errors in how the fees were handled.
Like what? Can you give us an example?
Well, for one, she claims that Elena was mistakenly placed on her property for a payment she had already made.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. And while that was eventually corrected, it's understandable why that would raise red flags. If that kind of mistake can happen, what else might be slipping through the cracks?
Exactly, and I can only imagine the stress of dealing with something like that while you're also trying to navigate a custody battle. It's like adding another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation.
It is, and for someone who might not be as familiar with the legal system, it can feel really intimidating to question these things, to challenge an invoice or ask for clarification on a fee.
Totally. You're already in a vulnerable position, and then you're dealing with all this financial stuff on top of it. It feels like it could be easy for someone to take advantage of that.
Exactly. And it raises the question of access to justice, right? Because if you can't afford a lawyer, if you're not able to fight back against these financial burdens, does that mean you're less likely to get a fair shake in court?
It's something to think about for sure.
It is. And Elena doesn't stop there with the financial concerns. She also questions an additional $10,000 in fees that Langston requested.
$10,000? For what?
Well, the details are a little unclear from the documents we have, but Elena's arguing that the fees should be apportioned based on income.
So the person who makes more money should contribute more to the overall costs.
Exactly. It's about making sure the financial burden is distributed fairly, and that one party's greater financial resources don't give them an unfair advantage in the case.
Which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. The focus should be on the kids and what's best for them, not on who has the deeper pockets.
Exactly. And yet, so often, money ends up playing a huge role in these legal battles.
So we've talked a lot about the allegations against Langston, the financial concerns, but at the end of the day, I keep coming back to those 5 kids. They're the ones caught in the middle of all this. What's the latest on Elena's relationship with her children?
That's the question that haunts me after reading this complaint. We don't really get an update on that. The document focuses mainly on the legal battle, on Elena's fight to remove Langston.
So we don't know if she's been able to see her kids more regularly, if the court is considering her motions, if her daughter's allegations have been investigated.
Right, and that's the hard part, not knowing what's happened since she filed this complaint.
It's like we're looking at a snapshot in time, but we don't have the full picture yet.
Exactly.
It's like we're missing a few puzzle pieces, right? We have all these details about the allegations, the court proceedings, but we don't get to see the resolution.
Exactly, and that's the nature of these deep dives sometimes. We're dealing with real-time situations, often still unfolding.
And in this case, it's especially important to remember that we're only hearing one side of the story.
Right, we have Elena's perspective, her experience, which she lays out very clearly in her complaint, but we haven't heard from Langston, the GAL. We don't know his side of the story.
And I imagine he might have a very different perspective on these events.
It's entirely possible. There are always multiple sides to every story, and that's why it's so important to avoid jumping to conclusions.
Absolutely. Our goal is to present the information as objectively as possible, to give our listeners all the pieces we have and let them form their own opinions.
Exactly. We're not here to judge or to say who's right or wrong.
Right. But even without all the answers, Elena's case raises some really important questions about the family court system.
For sure. And I think it highlights the importance of transparency and oversight in these kinds of cases.
Transparency is key.
Absolutely. Because when you're dealing with something as sensitive as child custody, when the stakes are so high, there needs to be accountability at every level.
And it makes you wonder what can be done to prevent situations like this from happening in the first place.
Well, for starters, I think we need to be having more open and honest conversations about the potential for bias in these systems.
Because no system is perfect, right?
Yeah,
There's always room for improvement.
exactly.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that guardians ad litem are receiving adequate training, not just on the legal aspects of their role, but also on things like implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, trauma-informed care.
Oh, that's such a good point, because they're dealing with families from all walks of life facing all sorts of challenges.
Exactly. And those challenges often intersect with systemic issues like poverty, race, and access to mental health care. So the GAL needs to be equipped to navigate those complexities with sensitivity and understanding.
It's a lot to ask, but it's so important. These are kids' lives we're talking about.
Absolutely. And their well-being should be at the forefront of every decision made in family court.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we can't be complacent. We need to keep talking about these issues, keep asking tough questions, keep pushing for a more just and equitable system for families.
Well said. It's an ongoing conversation and one that we all have a role to play in.
And we want to hear from you, our listeners. What are your thoughts on this case? Have you had any experience with the family court system? Share your thoughts, share your stories, because it's through these conversations that we can learn from each other and work towards creating a better future for all families.
That's right. Your experiences and insights are valuable, so please keep the conversation going.
And as always, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another case, another story, another opportunity to explore the complexities of the legal system together.